there, Banditos. Welcome to the latest Friday episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits, where, as always, we fling open the doors of your local comic book shop and bring you interviews with your favorite comic book creators of yesterday and today. And we are keeping the independent train rolling, and we're also bringing you another episode with all three of us here together. So let's not talk, let's not jinx ourselves. Hopefully we can keep this going. But at any rate, like I mentioned, we're talking to another independent comic book creator. We're talking to Dave Baker.
Yeah, Dave's working on a book, or he has worked on a book called Halloween Boy, which has really caught a wonderful following on. Folks are loving it. And just a heads up, guys, Sean McMillan, our buddy who does our graphics for us, he was initially on the interview. You'll hear him for a little bit. He had some audio issues and had to check out. So if you're like wondering where Sean goes in the interview, that's what happened. It's not a problem with your stuff. It's just what happens here sometimes.
Technical snafus aside, it's always great to hear from the independent writers, artists, creators. We had, Terry Moore on earlier this week, and now Dave Baker. It's great to get their perspectives and get a little bit of insight from outside the, mainstream comics. So let's stop delaying. This is Dave Baker.
Our co-bandit, Mr. Sean McMillan, filling in for us tonight. Sean, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm great because we are talking to Eisner-nominated comic book creator Dave Baker. That's why I'm excited. How are you, sir?
I'm well. Thank you for reiterating that. I'm very proud of it. I know it's extra, but also it just is what it is, man. I'm pretty excited about that silly little fact.
Well, you should be. So let's start at the very beginning. How did you first discover comics growing up?
I first got into comics through Franco-Belgian stuff, specifically Tintin and Hergé. As a little kid, I was really obsessed with like boy adventurer, girl adventurer, boy detective, girl detective, like Nancy Drew, Hardy Boys, Trixie Belden, Boxcar Children, all that kind of stuff. I was really into those, little kid novels as a young person, and we were at the library, and I had read all of them, or they had all been read to me because I was really young. And my mom was talking to the librarian, like, he loves these Hardy Boy things. Is there other Hardy Boy stuff like that? And some random librarian changed my life forever because she was like, they, I don't know who it was. They were like, yeah, do you know what Tintin is? And I'm from Tucson, Arizona, so there's not a whole lot of there's not a whole lot of culture there other than cowboy boots and military bases. And it changed my life forever. I'm obsessed with Tintin. I love Hergé. I recently I lived in Europe for a little while, and while I was there, I went on a big pilgrimage to my version of Mecca, where I went to Brussels and went to the Hergé Museum and saw all the original artwork for all of the strips. And yeah, it was an amazing experience. And I think you can kind of see it in the way I draw too, to a certain extent. I really like that, Franco-Belgian Linea Clara, very simple, kind of pregnant line. And then I also like, people who put way too many details in things and blow their wrist out by the time they're 25. So, those are the two things. It's like Jeff Darrow and Hergé are like, and James Stokoe and Katsuhiro Otomo, and that kind of stuff just really makes me really excited. Yeah.
So how did you say to yourself, okay, maybe I want to get into this as well?
There's that quote that Bill Sienkiewicz says in every interview: "I didn't choose comics; comics chose me." And I feel somewhat similarly. After a bunch of, obsessively poring over Hergé's Tintin body of work, I got into American stuff and read a bunch of superhero stuff, and that led me into indie comics, and that led me into manga, and then that led me back to Franco-Belgian stuff. So I read everything. And it kind of wasn't ever a choice for me, really. It's the only thing that's ever, it's a siren's call. It's the same way of like, how did you end up in the seminary? And it's like, well, God spoke to me, except in our case, God was the 5'4" Jewish man with a cigar sitting at the table going, "True believer." Well, I guess that was more Stan. I don't know that Jack said true
I was
believer.
gonna say.
Yeah.
I just want to talk in generalities for a second here because you found a lot of success right now in the independent comic scene. For folks who are listening, I mean,
Have I? I don't know. I don't know.
Eisner nominated, but
That's true. That's true. Yes.
what are some things you've learned along the way about getting yourself out there? Because the independent scene is becoming very crowded now with the the Kickstarters and the GoFundMe sort of things. How do you make yourself stand out?
It's a good question. Excuse me. Yeah, I don't know. I think how do you stand out in the indie scene? I think making work that feels genuine and authentic and personal to you. Like I don't know that everybody I don't know that if you put a slate of projects in front of some development executive, they would point at Halloween Boy and be like, that's the one people will respond to. Because it's kind of a kooky, dorky, on its surface seeming premise. But I think once you are talking to me or you see the book and you kind of get the vibe of it, I think it's very apparent that it comes from a genuine place of love and adoration for these tropes and this genre. And I also think that, it's pretty apparent, at least to me as a creator, it's pretty apparent when someone's heart is not in it and when there's a screenplay that's being adapted into a IP farm scheme with a celebrity attached or, whatever the end goal may be. Not that there's anything wrong with that. If that makes people happy, great. I don't care, whatever. But I think that there's a marked difference between something where someone is crafting an idiosyncratic opus of their worldview and then maybe when someone, is, I don't know, attempting to game the system, whatever that means. I'm assuming that was, for those who aren't aware, who is Halloween Boy, which is the question I will answer, and if it's not, then we'll do it again. Yeah, so Halloween Boy is the book that I'm currently making. There's 4 issues currently out. The 5th one is apparently being shipped to the printer, from the printer to my house currently, so the 5th one will be out hopefully around Halloween time. It's a kind of revisionist pulp adventure comic filtered through like an art house or indie comics lens. So we follow the titular protagonist, Halloween Boy, who is the patron saint of kind of lost causes or the impossible. So whenever somebody is in a scenario that they can't get themselves out of, they show up on the doorstep of his floating skull-shaped island and they're like, please, Halloween Boy, help us out. And he'll take on their kind of unwinnable quest. So each issue is him going on some sort of bizarre or unexpected journey to help people in unwinnable scenarios. And as the book progresses, as the issues kind of build on each other, there's a kind of there's like an arc, a mystery arc that runs through all of these standalone adventures about his family lineage and maybe some stories that he's been told about that family that may or may not be true. And yeah, so it's kind of maybe Buckaroo Banzai meets, the X-Files or something. I don't really have like a pithy it's this meets that, because it's a little hard for me to describe. I feel like it'd probably be easy for somebody else because I'm always kind of like consumed in the like, oh yeah, but it's also this and it's also that, and I love Star Wars and that's in there, but it has nothing, like there's no laser swords, like it has nothing to do with it.
I'll read you. It says that in your comic book, there's a lot of influences people tell from like Doc Savage, The Phantom, Flash Gordon. How did all these influences sort of come together to this book?
So the book kind of started because this was supposed to be kind of my like almost gap book, because I finished a graphic novel last year that Top Shelf is going to be publishing called Mary Tyler Moorhawk. It comes out in February. And I had a year basically in between setting it up there and when I was, gonna need to start promoting and doing stuff for Mary Tyler Moorhawk. So I was like, what am I gonna do? What am I spend my time on? I got to do something, right? Because I'm a workaholic. You can't just sit there. You can't just relax for a minute. So I was kind of going through some old folders, looking at some designs or ideas for different stories that I had, and One of them was a couple years ago, like 2019, 2020. I was working as like an adjunct editor at a smaller publisher, and I was in talks with King Features about getting the rights to both Flash Gordon and the Phantom.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it was really fun. They were all really nice, and they were receptive to the ideas that we had. And we had some conversations, and then they were like, "This is really great. Can you kind of pitch us more in depth, like a God document of what you would see the publishing plan for the next couple years being?" And so I worked up this document, and I did some concept designs of like what I would do with the Phantom and Doc Savage. And as these things go, sometimes they don't go anywhere. So this one, it didn't go, and we decided to part ways and amicably. And everybody over at King Features was nothing but great to me. I stumbled across this God document again, being like, oh my God, yeah, the Phantom, yeah. And I love the Phantom. Like the Phantom is, the Phantom and Johnny Quest are like my favorite things. I just love both of them so much. And I started looking at that document again, and I was like, if I just kind of like filed the serial numbers off of here, there could be some interesting stuff to do. And so I kind of took some of the ideas from the Flash Gordon pitch and some of the ideas from the Phantom pitch, and then some of my own just disparate ideas for other stories ideas, and I kind of molded them all together. So I think Halloween Boy is kind of a smorgasbord of everything I like about pulp characters. And specifically that I love because so many of those pulp characters ran for literally decades, if not still running now, they all have these interesting barnacles of like, they all have, they have their set, they have their origin, and they have their supporting cast, and then they have their vehicle, and they have their like sidekick animal that's usually a pet, and sometimes it's intelligent, sometimes it's not, and then they have their like, they all have weird racist problematic areas where, either it's the Shadow and he has to go to fucking Tibet, or it's, the Phantom being a literal like pseudo warlord, like lording over a fictional African nation, which is really weird. And like, so some of the stuff I was pitching to King Features was like, let's embrace some of that stuff and talk about the weird racial dynamics in these cult characters and pulp characters, and how from a modern day it's just horrible, and I think that goes along with a lot of how society interacts with those ideas, because we all are products of systems that have benefited from inequality. So how does that manifest when filtered through the lens of pulp adventure stuff? Like what can you do there that is staunchly anti-colonialist, with a character that is steeped in colonial iconography? I think that could be really interesting. And so that's kind of those ideas were the soup that spawned the demon who walks, as they say. Which is...
One thing you said that is really interesting, and I can tell by talking to you, is that you are a workaholic. You have a lot of ideas. When you're on a project, how do you focus on what you're doing? Because I'm sure there are times when you're working on Halloween Boy that like pops into your head. You're like, oh, you know what? That might be good for this, or oh, this could be a good thing. How do you sort of buckle down to what you're working on?
I kind of work on multiple things at once. So like, right now I'm working on a graphic novel that I wrote that I'm not drawing, that Nicole Gu, my longtime creative partner on multiple books, she's drawing that. I wrote some Turtle comics that just came out, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comics. And then I'm drawing this, and then I'm kind of also developing 2 other things with some other artists. So it's kind of a weird like do-si-do of like, this is the fire that needs to be put out today. Oh, that's the fire that needs to be put out there. And so you kind of, at least for me, I kind of jump around. And when I'm waiting for things from other people, that's usually when I draw. Which there's a surprising amount of waiting in comics. There's a lot of like, just sitting on your hands going, well, someday.
How far advanced do you plan in your mind a story arc? Do you go from beginning to end, or do you just have one block that you want to work on at a time?
Yeah, I would say there's usually an end point. Mostly because I don't have the privilege to be able to just launch an ongoing and hope that it lasts 50 issues. my resident status as indie comics darling aside, I don't think I don't think that there's enough of an audience to just be like, yeah, we're launching an ongoing, it's going to last 100 issues. Like that's just not a reality. So yeah, most of the work I do is either me planning to do X number of issues or me planning a graphic novel which has a beginning, middle, and end. Something along those lines. Yeah.
That's another good point you bring up. So when you do issue 1 of Halloween Boy, and you don't know, how many issues they're going to be, how do you give just the right amount of information to introduce the character, but not overwhelm the story?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I specifically wanted to do with Old Dirty Halloween Boy is I really wanted to make it feel like it was a comic in an existing world. I wanted to make it feel like you're joining him as he's been Halloween Boy for a long time. It wasn't going to be an origin. It wasn't going to be like, a soft launch. It's like, no. You're thrown into the deep end. I love Buckaroo Banzai because the joke of the movie is that it's a sequel to a franchise that doesn't exist. And it's such a shortcut. And also, weirdly, that's the world we live in now. Like every movie is a sequel to something from somewhere else it's so strange that the world of 1987 or whenever Buckaroo Banzai came out, where like it was this immensely avant-garde joke to be like, and then he's a scientist and a rock star and an adventurer, is now just like that's what all movies are. Is like, oh yeah, there's a guy and he wears a suit and he fights people and in a costume that's named after an animal, and he also had an era where he was a scientist. Like that all media is now just like pulp media writ large, which is so fascinating. And I don't always know that it is in a healthy way, but it's still interesting to me. So yeah, that first issue, I really wanted it to be kind of to capture the feeling that I had the first time I watched Buckaroo Banzai, or the first time I read the Buckaroo Banzai novelization by Earl Mac Rauch, which is a fascinating book if no one has read it. Because the novelization of Buckaroo Banzai is an in-world epistolary book. Like it's the Reno kids, like Dr. Watson journals of the Buckaroo Banzai adventure. So it's all told from Reno's perspective as he's like following Buckaroo around, and like if he is not in the scene from the movie, then it's like him interviewing Buckaroo after the fact to get the information of what happened. And so there's all of this, like, it's in some ways it's the codex to deciphering the movie, where the movie, I like the fact that it's all just payoffs. There's no setup. There's no understanding of what the joke that they're repeating is. But the novelization is the explanation of who who Rawhide is, and what happened to Buckaroo Banzai's mom, and what Hanoi Jan's backstory is, and like all of these weird things that are just kind of like thrown off in the movie are expanded on and built upon and illustrated, no pun intended, in the novelization. And so I kind of wanted to make something that felt like that, really dense and weird. And my goal was to make a commercially viable, inscrutable pulp thing where there'd just be like idea on idea on idea, but hopefully have it still be accessible to a reader.
So you have the story. Now how are you putting together the art that goes with it?
Well, the answer there is my original plan was I was gonna draw a 4-issue miniseries, and then as I started drawing it, I kind of went off into the finished product is very different than what my original plan was. The first issue is pretty similar. The second issue is probably about 30% my original plan. And then 3, 4, and 5 are just completely different. It's one of those things where, how writers sometimes describe it as like the character started talking to you. I relate to that a lot. And I also specifically, once I'm starting to draw somebody, it's like, oh, this idea that I had of like they're going to be sitting in a coffee shop and it's going to be this somber scene is like, oh, actually, I don't want to fucking draw that. Like they're going to be riding a dinosaur. They're going to be shooting a bazooka or whatever it is. Yeah. But also I wanted to make something really fast because my last book took like 4 years to draw, and I reinvented the way I drew. I'd drawn probably 4 or 5 graphic novels that were all, you write it, you do thumbnails, you pencil it, you ink it, you letter it, and I didn't really want to work that way anymore because it just took so long. So on Mary Tyler Moorhawk, I figured out a way of drawing where I draw all my quote unquote pencils in this red architectural tech pen.
Right.
And then I draw finished, and it's mostly just construction lines and like smiley faces and like vague outlines of things. And then I draw my finished line work in pencil, pull it into Photoshop, pull out the red, and then just up the contrast to make those pencils look darker or more finished. And when I was drawing MTMH, it took me a while to figure out how to do that process effectively. And now I'm very fast at it. Like I said, it took me 4 years to draw MTMH, and it took me probably about a year, maybe 9 to 11 months to draw 175 pages of Halloween Boy. So it's significantly faster.
Let's say, are there points that you look back on as sort of milestones for you as to when, I guess the word would be, evolved as an artist, like moments where you're like, okay, this makes sense, this works best for me, and then you just took off from there?
Yeah, I would say so. I think figuring out the process of working on Mary Tyler Moorhawk was a big turning point, specifically because I just needed to make more work. I draw in a very detailed style, so making full pencils takes me about a year, and then making full inks again takes me about a year. It's an emotionally disruptive and destructive experience. I don't like it. I like the act of inking, but it just takes so long that by the time you're finished with a thing, you're like, I want to make like 5 books before I die. You know what I mean? Like this stuff. So like, the process of figuring out what a workflow could be that would allow me to be more productive, but not lose what I perceived as the exciting or interesting things about my work, was a big step up. And I think the craft level in Halloween Boy is the next level of that, where it's like I figured everything out on Mary Tyler Moorhawk, and then Halloween Boy is where I kind of solidified everything, and the quote unquote band really congealed. The spotting of the blacks, the perspective, the creature design, whatever it is, all of those things I stopped having to fight with the process and started being able to use the process to make an end result, if that makes any sense.
Makes sense, definitely. You mentioned before that where you are now is not where you intended when you started the book. And is there ever a battle inside of you to sort of stay on target of the track that you already had? Or do you say, you know what, this just makes sense, let's just go with what's going on?
Yes, it is a constant internal debate, which ultimately I think for me, the idea of it's almost kind of iterative blueprints, like you pitch to a publisher and you say, this is what I think it is. And the publisher says, yeah, that could be cool. But what if this was different? And, our market research says we need that different. And, this over here is something we can't do. We can't get it by the censors. And you're like, okay, so that those areas of the blueprint need to change. And then you write the book, and over the course of writing it, then you're like, oh, actually, the thing that I was originally planning for the third act, because of these censor requirements or publisher requests or editor notes or whatever, actually works better if I do it that way. And then the next stage, when you're drawing it, you're like, oh, you know what? That thing I wrote where I was fixing, a pothole narratively, that actually, if I draw it that way, it makes it even better. And so to me, it's almost like sculpting. Like I think of especially when I'm drawing something that I wrote, I'm not particularly precious with the script, because I know the root idea of the thing I'm trying to talk about. And to me, it's more mining that idea to find the best drawings and the best story. And sometimes those things are in conflict, and you need to do away with a specific visual trope that you were originally excited about because the story needs something else. And sometimes it's the other way around, where like, oh, you had this great emotional beat that took place in a convenience store, but then you start drawing a convenience store and you're just like, I'm not going to draw 400 bottles of water on this wall. Like, I'm just not going to.
Yeah.
So we're going to change it and we're going to put it in somewhere else, you know? And to me, that process is fun. Like that is the fun of making things when it's me by myself, because I don't ever feel comfortable asking an artist, hey, I really need you to draw those water bottles. You know what I mean? Like I don't feel comfortable doing that. But for myself, I'm more than content to be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna set this scene in a convenience store. Look at all these water bottles. This is great. I love this. You know what I mean? So there's a give and a take when I'm working with myself that is very different than when I'm working with another artist, because they also bring their own thing to it. So a lot of time I'm writing to their strengths, you know, like I did a Star Trek Voyager miniseries for IDW, and Angel Hernandez did the artwork for that. And I wrote a bunch of stuff in there that I personally never would have written for me to draw, because I was like, no, and this is not, I don't want to do this. But, you know, in looking at his work and looking at what he cares about, it's super apparent the stuff he likes. So I gave him a bunch of that stuff. And I think you can feel that. I think you can feel it in books when an artist and a writer are well aligned, or when an artist and a writer understand each other and one of them is servicing the other, you know, as opposed to when a writer has a very specific vision and the artwork doesn't always serve that, or vice versa.
I have a two-part one for you, but the first part would be, do you feel comfortable as a writer, as an artist, I guess, playing with other people's toys, characters, or, you know, that belong to, you know, a different entity, as opposed to creating your own stuff? Or do you feel more comfortable doing things that you came up with yourself?
I mean, I prefer making my own stuff for sure. There's just more strings with the other stuff, and that's fine. That's the process, and I like that. You know, I think there's a fun, you know, I mean, look, I'm a huge Star Trek fan, huge Star Trek. So getting to work on a Trek book was just like a dream come true. And the editor, Chase, is just, he was great. CBS was really great to me. I know some people who have not had such positive experiences, but for me, they were just like, they didn't really give me any notes. They had like, I think 2 notes really. Like they didn't want me to use the word insurrector at one point, which was really funny to me. But I was like, yeah, sure. Yeah. You don't want me to use the word insurrector. It's gone. Moving on. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, sure. Sounds great. But you know, they treated me really well. And it was really fun to work on Star Trek, but it's just a different experience. You know, it's a different, even if I wrote the best Star Trek comic ever, it wouldn't be mine. It would be emotionally, I mean literally, it's not mine, it's work for hire, they own everything, but like there's a difference, you know, between going on one date with somebody and being married, right? And that's what, you know, like Nicole and I always talk about our characters from, you know, Everyone is Tulip or Forest Hills or Fuck Off Squad, and we always call them the kids, you know, like we've had various Hollywood situations happen and they've been very great, and everyone that we've worked with have been super nice. But there is a little fear there of just like, you know, what are they going to do to the kids? You know, what's going to happen if, you know, over the course of the creative process, things evolve and change, and Nicole and I are not there to say, oh no, that's not something that X or Y character would do. Because when you are signing, you know, when you're signing on the dotted line, you're kind of enlisting in the circus, you know, you're letting your children go off, and creative children go off, and hopefully they have a good time and everybody treats them well. But the world is a cruel and weird, cold place. So you never know, you know. Thankfully, everybody that we've had dealings with thus far have been very generous and really positive experiences. And that's kind of, you know, that's the goal with everything you do, right? You want to make work that speaks to your perspective. And then when other cooks get in the kitchen, it doesn't matter if it's good or bad. It's just a different perspective. And so it's a discussion of what is that perspective? How is that perspective shifting? But that's why I like making work that's original that I make or that Nicole and I make or the various other collaborators. You know, Alexis Zarrett and I did a book for Floating World called Night Hunters, which is kind of a cyberpunk dystopian book, and that book is very, very much influenced by Alexis. It's set in Venezuela. He's from Venezuela. It's about, you know, income inequality and class in a society where that is a very tangible, potent thing. And of course, you know, we're doing it through the lens of cyberpunk, and it's a pulpy story, but hopefully there's a heart and a beating pulse to it that speaks to something deeper. And that just wouldn't happen if it wasn't Alexis being the one being like, no, man, no. It should be this. And me being like, oh, wow, yeah, that is way better. Like, that's a great idea. And you can't always do that when you're writing Wolverine, because there's 90 years of fucking history of people like, no. He says bub, you know.
When you're doing Star Trek, just because, you know, you said you're a big fan and Star Trek fandom is huge, it would seem like there'd be pressure because, you know, there's going to be people looking at every little aspect of what's happening, ready to jump and be like, well, no. Is that sort of a frustration that comes with it?
No, I wouldn't say it's a frustration. I would say it's a privilege and honor. You know, I mean, I treated that thing like I was making like a period piece documentary. You know, I can tell you what episodes of Voyager that my book took place in between. You know, there's payoffs and continuing jokes all through that fourth season that are in my story because I wanted to incorporate all those. You know, there's lines that Seven of Nine says that are very similar to what she says in the TV show. You know, vocal tics that they all have. Because in the TV show there's no canonical explanation for why Janeway's hair style changes. That's in there because that's something that's always bugged me that they never talked about her getting a haircut. And so I was like, oh, we're gonna do that. So the first season or the first scene in the book is Janeway and Tuvok walking down one of the corridors, and they're talking about how she just had a haircut or whatever. And it's I think it's a very funny scene. But that's also just like 100% like my shit. Like Tuvok is my favorite Star Trek character. I love Voyager. I just, yeah, it was a great process to work on. I really loved the end result. And it's just so weird to see a Star Trek book with my name on it. Like it's very strange.
You mentioned a number of projects that you worked on before. How do you know what's the right person to work with? Is this folks, are these all friends of yours or people whose work that you like that you said, you know what, maybe this would be a good collaboration?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, right? You know, I think, you know, sometimes you try to work with somebody and, you know, maybe they're not feeling you, maybe you're not feeling them, maybe the money just isn't right. That happens a lot where you start a pitch, take it to a bunch of publishers, get some offers, and then the money's it's just literally not enough. And then you both shake hands and go, all right, we'll part ways. No harm, no foul. We just couldn't get this one above X level. And you know, that's just the reality of the direct market. It's just fucking brutal. But yeah, I think that, you know, I think that's what makes a great writer from a good writer is being able to tell A, who's going to be a good collaborator, and B, who as an artist is going to bring whatever that texture is, you know. You know, they say that that's what makes a great rapper from an okay rapper is being able to choose beats, you know, and not every rapper who's brilliant at lyrics understands like what a really hooky, catchy, earworm beat is, you know. And I think that's, you know, you can tell the great writers in comics because they pick artists that have a voice. They pick artists that are well aligned with a central dramatic kind of coefficient they both work towards. And conversely, I think you can really feel when an artist and a writer are not aligned on a book. I feel like there's like decades of comics where that just doesn't happen. Like a lot of the work from the 90s is just like the artist is doing one thing and the writer is doing the other. Like
now, you guys are also, Halloween Boy is going to have his own action figure coming out pretty soon.
Yeah.
How cool is that? A, and B, how did that all come together?
It's very cool. I'm very excited. Very, 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 very excited. My understanding is that the toy pre-order window on Big Bad Toy Store will have gone up on October 16th, I believe. So I think this goes live after that, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, so fingers crossed it's live right now. Um, yeah, he's a 1/12 figure, 6-inch figure, fully articulated. I think he's got like 30 points or 25 points of articulation. And I don't know, for my money, I think he looks amazing. Every time I see that fucking toy, I'm just like, oh my God, oh my God, he looks so good. And I think part of that is because Bill Murphy, who runs Fresh Monkey Fiction, the company that's producing this toy, has been very generous with me specifically. I designed the toy. I worked to art direct him, and I worked with him and the sculptor to make sure that, all of the proportions were correct. And he literally would send me the digital sculpts from the sculptor, and then I would pull them into Procreate and I would draw on the designs. Like, no. His ears need to be like that, and no, his mouth needs to be like this, and his eyebrows are too high. You got to put the eyebrows here. The top of his ear mask ends right at the same line as his eyebrows and eyes, so it's like right there. Like, you can't put them up. And it was a great experience. I loved it. It was so fun. When I first started drawing Halloween Boy, I bought a bunch of toys, almost as like a totemic vision board thing, where I bought this guy, this English vinyl figure of martial law. Yeah. I'm a big Kevin O'Neill and Pat Mills fan. I love Pat Mills. And I'm a big fan of martial law specifically. And I bought like a Martha Washington figure, and I bought a Danger Diabolique figure, and I bought and Elijah Snow. Oh yeah, here he's right here. I bought an Elijah Snow from the Planetary figure.
That's fresh.
Because I was just kind of like, the thing that is so enticing to me about a lot of these pulp characters is the fact that they've gone on beyond their means. They've gone on beyond their original humble origins of comic strips or pulp novels or whatever the fuck it is. And so buying those figures and keeping them on my desk was almost kind of like a spiritual North Star of I'm going to draw this guy, and I'm going to draw him so well that I'm going to turn him into a tulpa, the Tibetan Buddhist monk idea, that an imaginary friend that you believe in so hard that they become real. And that's an oversimplification of what a tulpa is, but whatever. And just this totemic idea that you believe in so greatly that it warps the fabric of space-time, and it fully manifests in reality. And initially I was like, oh, that's impossible, obviously. And then I was like, oh no, that's the key to the character. He's the patron saint of the impossible. And when you're starting a new creative endeavor, especially when you don't have a publisher lined up immediately, everything feels impossible. You're like, no one's going to care about this. Self-publishing fucking sucks. This is just, it's just brutal out here. But that idea of kind of combining these, look at what other people who've made creator-owned comics have done and how it's expanded out. I'm going to try and do that with Halloween Boy. And that's kind of what the conversation between me and Bill Murphy at Fresh Monkey Fiction started as, because I was asking him questions about manufacturing, because I was looking into manufacturing my own toy. And then we started talking about some stuff. He pitched me some ideas, and then ultimately I kind of came to him and was like, hey, you're doing this toy line called Operation Monster Force. And it's, kind of the aesthetic is what if G.I. Joes were fighting Universal monsters? And my guy is kind of that's the aesthetic. It's what if Doc Savage, but make him paramilitary, without the fascist stuff. We don't need the fascist stuff. We don't want to do that. What if Doc Savage was anti-fascist? And,
there you go.
Yeah. And so we were kind of talking about it, and I was like, if you took some of these pieces from your existing toys, if we just made a new head and then made the sword that he uses, the Obeyer blade,
Mhm.
it's kind of a free shot on goal. You would get your toy and I would get a toy. You don't have to pay that much, and I would get a Halloween Boy figure,
Right.
and then we, have this figure, and that's kind of what it turned into. I licensed Halloween Boy to Bill, so I think he has the rights. I don't think I know he has the rights to make these toys, and I'm just so fucking thrilled, and I cannot wait to hold this motherfucker in my hands. I want to hold that sweet baby boy.
The house is going to be surrounded with unopened figures. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, no, I'm gonna be like fucking Howard Hughes, like peeing in boxes. I'm never gonna leave. I'm just gonna be like looking at the Halloween Boy toys, being like, the
That's all you
demon
need to do.
is. Yeah.
Are you going to have him battle some of the other figures though?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. You gotta,
You have to.
pose them. You gotta stop motion videos. 100%. Yeah, of course.
Yes, you were talking about the different aspects of Halloween Boy, and what was the first thing that you built the character on? Was it a personality trait? Was it a look? Was it just what was it?
I mean, speaking callously, it was a drawing I did of the Phantom
Mhm.
he was writing on the back of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, because that's what I gave to King Features. Was like, this
Right.
this is the character. I want to do like big pulpy Silver Age ideas, but then with a real kind of heart to it.
Mhm.
And the visual side of it would be, this is what he would look like. He wouldn't be wearing as much spandex. He would still wear the cowl of the Phantom, but it would be, he'd have a bandolier of knives, and he'd have a backpack, and yes, he would still have the underwear, but the underwear might be over, paramilitary fatigues as opposed to spandex.
Right.
I love underwear over stuff. It cracks
It's a
me up.
classic look. Yeah.
It's a classic look. I love it. Ironically, over the course of making Halloween Boy, I have to be careful how I phrase this, but the primary Halloween Boy that we follow does not have his underwear over his pants, but there are multiple characters who do have underwear over their pants.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it was really that idea of like this guy on a Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Yeah.
And I actually kind of drew him wrong the first time. And I drew it like the Phantom cowl, but I put his ear out on one side too far. And then I was like, oh, that's kind of an interesting look. I wonder if you could like, that it could be like a step, like a little mini like wing. And then over the course of drawing those first 2 or 3 issues, it like it went from this to this to this, and now his ears are like, full like 9 inches out from the side of his head. Can't even like walk through doorways without hitting his ears on stuff.
So you have issue 5 coming out, knock wood, by Halloween.
Yeah.
What other projects are you working on? What else is going on?
I'm tinkering with a thing right now that I'm drawing. I've got about 25 pages with it. I haven't fully decided exactly what's going on with that. And then I'm, like I said, working on a graphic novel with Nicole Gu that she's drawing called Pumpkinheads. It's a coming of age romance comic about a bunch of kids who live in a punk flop house and play in a punk band together, where they wear pumpkin masks and they play horror punk and pumpkin heads. It's very similar to a lot of the other works we've done, where it's about teenagers and 20-somethings and smooching. I love a good smooch.
Sure.
Love a good smooch comic.
Yeah.
I find that even when I'm not writing about explicitly, because most of the stuff Nicole and I make are romance comics, because I want more of those to exist. I love romance comics. And even when there's not smooching in a comic, I'm like, it'd be better if there was some smooching,
Yeah. Put it in there, the Punisher or something like that.
Yeah, Punisher smooching on somebody.
Yeah.
Great. He'd be
He
less
deserves
angry.
it. Yeah, you should have a good time once in a while.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the Punisher is a smooch comic in absentia. It's about what happens when you don't smooch,
Just get built up. Yeah.
Yeah, he's like, oh, my family, they were taken from me. Who else am I gonna smooch?
And then it all goes downhill from there.
Yeah, and then it just inspires people to like storm the Capitol or whatever. All those Capitol motherfuckers, they should have just been out smooching.
Yeah.
You know, they would be so much more chill if they were just smooching.
It makes life a lot better.
Yeah.
So my last question is, which is cooler, being nominated for an Eisner, having an action figure of your character, or being part of Star Trek mythology?
It would have been cooler if we won the Eisner, but we didn't. Lost. But we lost to fucking Jeff Lemire, so you can't really be that upset, right?
I
Like
mean,
Jeff Lemire and Jock, and it's like, yeah, all right. It's funny when we were, we got to go to the Eisner ceremony, which was so great. I go to the Eisners every year. I'm like the one human that just loves the ceremony. I love it so much. It's such a spiritually healing thing for me to see everybody just getting their flowers and just everybody clapping and being like, yeah, we fucking love comics. Are the Eisners perfect? No. Should they be called the Kirbys? Yes. But I love the institution of the same people every year getting together and just loving comics. It's the best. And usually I go and I sit in the back, because that's where you sit when you're just a rando plebe. And to be able to sit in the front and eat the weird shitty cold buffet, I was like, this is the fucking best thing ever, man. This is the greatest. And so we're sitting there and our category comes up and it's like, this book by so-and-so and so-and-so. Everybody just politely claps. This book by so-and-so and so-and-so politely claps. Everyone is Tulip by Dave Baker and Nicole Gu politely claps. And then the book by Jeff Lemire and Jock. And it's like literally people are like catcalling, like, yeah. And I'm like, yeah, all right. Yeah. It's
the
pretty
deck might have been stacked against you a little bit.
Yeah, it's pretty apparent who's winning this category. And you know what? They've done a lot of great work. They deserve the accolades. They deserve the love because they fucking put the work in the trenches, And so that was very fun, but I don't know that it yeah, I don't know, man. This is a really hard question because having the toy, I can't fully understand because I don't have it yet. Once I have that thing, I think that might be maybe a little better, but I think to be cheesy for a second, I walk around every day with an Eisner nominee sticker in my wallet because I want to win one of those someday. And that to me is like that's my version of the Jim Carrey writing himself a check for $1 million and keeping it in his wallet every day. That's my like promise to myself of like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to fucking do this. And for that book to be nominated after it was very difficult for us to sell to a publisher, and then for Dark Horse to believe in it and for it to do well and for it to get accolades and be featured on the cover of Panel by Panel, it really felt like a victory lap. So I'll probably say that one. It was a very positive experience. And there aren't many of those in comics.
So next time you get nominated, can I show up and start catcalling when they call your name and just get the crowd?
Please.
That's what we'll do. We'll be your hype squad.
And we're back. Oren, this was another home run on your part. This was very interesting and eye-opening interview. Didn't really know much about Dave prior to this, and this is great. Has done a lot of great and interesting work.
Yeah, it was really cool to hear about Dave's process, how this all kind of comes together. And, he has so many ideas going on and sort of to streamline them to get out these books. I thought it was just absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, another kudos to Oren and to Sean for his small part. I'm sorry he wasn't able to stick around, but it was good to hear from Dave. Love to hear from the independent creators, as I said. So check out Halloween Boy, everybody. Thank you, Dave, for being on. Thank you, Oren, for conducting the interview. Thank you, everybody, for listening and for viewing and for rating and for reviewing and for subscribing and for doing all those wonderful things that help get this podcast into everybody's ear holes. I said it, ear holes.
Wow.
So that's it for this week of Dollar Bin Bandits. Thank you all, and we will see you next week.